Hi, Jessie.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for being part of our conference. Um, you're like a special guest in that among like the 43 doctors, you're like, I think two or three or four men with prostate cancer that are, giving us talks. You're a daughter of a man with prostate cancer. Just like my dad had prostate cancer, your dad had prostate cancer.
Yeah.
Um, let's talk about that. Tell us when you found out and what it's like for you.
So he was diagnosed many, many years ago when I was, I think, 24, 25. And I found out through a phone call when he called to tell me that he had some bad news. And he said that he had been diagnosed with prostate cancer. And at the time, I remember thinking that it couldn't be true, or it would be, he'd go for another test and find out that it wasn't something that was really happening. And I don't know if it was because I was so young at the time or because I wasn't really familiar with prostate cancer, but it didn't really feel real to me until he started going through some of the treatments. And I started watching him experience some of the side effects, which for him were kind of debilitating.
Yeah, so let's start like, do like 10 minutes of really concrete, granular kind of thing. So you're 24. So did you even know that men had prostates when you were 24?
Yes, because my dad was actually a prostate cancer, a medical oncologist who was looking into prostate cancer. He didn't specialize in prostate cancer at the time, but he was doing some clinical trials at NIH that dealt with prostate cancer. And before that, he had been at NIH working on breast cancer and ovarian cancer. So I kind of knew in the background what all these things were, but it was more his profession and something he did for a living rather than something that impacted people that I knew.
Yeah. And what were you doing as for a living when you were 24?
Actually, now that I think about it, I was a little bit younger. I might have been 23. I was in grad school. So I was in my first year of a master's program in fine arts at American University in Washington, D.C.
Hmm.
And at the time, my parents were living in Central Virginia. So I would see them holidays in the summer, and I was really very much on my own.
Yeah. So who told you?
He did.
Yeah. And like, do you remember? I mean, is it like a talk you'll never forget, or can you remember
Yeah,
a bit for? Yeah.
I remember because I was at my boyfriend's house and it was before cell phones. So I remember calling my answering machine to get a message, and it said that he'd called and to call him as soon as I got the message. And so I did. And I remember sitting in my boyfriend's living room on his futon while there was music playing in the background. I think somebody else was there too. And my dad said my mom was away at a conference, so he was at home, and something had happened, and he wanted to tell me. And he said he had prostate cancer, and I remember saying, "Okay, well, I mean, that's not that big of a deal." Is it? I kind of dismissed it a little, as because well, as you do when you're young, things don't really seem real to you. Life and death issues don't always seem real to you when you're quite young. You still
Yeah.
view yourself and the people around you as being, immortal.
So today, though, you characterize it as life or death.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have brothers or sisters or
I
what?
have a younger sister. She's 2 years younger than me.
So was she part of that conversation too?
She was still in college
Yeah.
up in Massachusetts. So that was a separate phone call.
Okay.
For
So did your dad tell you what he was about to do treatment wise, or I mean, what
No,
was next?
he just had the diagnosis, and then he was going to go see a bunch of he was going to get second opinions. He'd had the diagnosis, I think, from a urologist. I don't honestly remember who diagnosed it. And then he was going to talk to a bunch of his colleagues and other thought leaders about what he should do, and then he was going to decide. So it was very much first reaction, I just found out and he wanted to tell us.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking that he sounded scared, which threw me because I didn't think I'd never heard him sound scared before.
Yeah. How old was he at that time?
I don't know, 50s, I guess. 55, 54, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, but I mean,
Yeah,
that
he
sounds
would have
about
been
right.
54. He would have been 54 because he's 30 years older than me. Yeah.
Yeah. So there you are. Your dad feels scared. You're noticing that. And, he's like you know, even at that time, he was sort of a well-known, oncologist, and it's once you get NIH funding, you sort of get elevated, in the profession. Did you think like it was like, I mean, how vulnerable did you think he was to death at that time, from your perspective?
I don't think I realized it was as severe of a case as it was.
Okay, so did you, is that another way of saying you weren't particularly scared yourself, or
No,
what?
I was not. Now, I've been thinking about this, was I not scared because I really didn't realize how bad how bad his diagnosis was? Or was it because I didn't want to believe that it was as bad as it was?
Yeah.
Because I remember being thrown that he was scared. And I remember feeling for the first time that, now I'm 47, so now things have changed a bit. But that was probably the first time in my life I remember thinking of one of my parents as vulnerable, or
Right.
as, there's like that hierarchy and your dad's your dad and he takes care of things and he shoulders the burden and he's never really weak or scared or sick, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, that was probably the first time in my whole life that I remember feeling like things had shifted a little bit.
Right.
But I don't think at the time, if you'd asked me if I thought my dad was going to die, I probably would have said no.
Yeah. And just so people who don't know who your dad is and don't start crying right this minute, I mean, he's still alive. He's still working.
He's cancer free. He's great. Yeah.
Well, I mean, he's had an advanced stage cancer and he's gone through treatments and he's self-treated himself. But
selected caregivers who gave him the.
Well, let's get into, you're here for you. Like, you're now, at age 23, 24, you got a younger sister, you got a boyfriend, you're in college and grad school. You haven't really started like a life path career kind of thing yet, as none of us did, in early 20s, or few of us did in early 20s. I mean, is there a sense of an additional burden that you hadn't planned on, or what?
No, although I will say, so this was in February of that year when he was diagnosed. And then in June of that year, I was supposed to go to Europe to teach English for a year with my boyfriend. Mm-hmm. We left for Europe in June, and by August, we came back. I think in part because I felt uncomfortable being away, because like he'd started one round of treatment and then he'd had another round where he had lymph nodes surgically removed, like a lot of lymph nodes removed. And then I left for the summer, and I remember feeling like very cut off and far away and just uneasy about leaving. And so we came back, and we actually came back and moved in with my parents for like 3 months with my boyfriend. I still can't believe they let me do that, but moved in with my boyfriend for like a couple months until we could get a place. And then I settled in Charlottesville, Virginia, which was never a plan to live in the same town as my parents. I was going to go to Europe, and then I was going to go to New York. I was going to do all these things, but I ended up back in the same town with them. And I think subconsciously, I probably did feel that burden, although it wasn't something that I was aware of. Not burden. I felt like I didn't want to go too far,
Physically too far from him.
Because who knew what was, he had a lot of the doctors told him that he probably wouldn't make it. Like it was, and the treatments that he chose were pretty hard on him. He had a lot of side effects. So yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. And your mom. Yeah. As he had those side effects, did he describe them to you? Did you talk with him about it? What was that like?
He's very matter of fact about things. Like he'll tell you up front, very honestly, what's going on, but he's less forthcoming about his feelings about what's going on. Right. So he'll say, I had radiation treatment and, I'm having like terrible rectal bleeding and I had to leave work and I can't even stand. But then that would be it. He's like, he's giving you the information and, and then, it's sort of like, well, are you scared? Or you like, like none of those kinds of things didn't happen or would evolve. Those kinds of conversations would evolve over months and years. and not necessarily in the moment. He's like, this is happening and I'm terrified. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, what would that mean to you if he had shared those feelings?
Given my age at the time, I probably would have felt uncomfortable. I mean, I was, young, 23, 24, 25 at that point, you don't really usually have those kinds of conversations with your dad, especially if you're a girl, a woman,
Yeah.
maybe a boy might, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a boy, so I don't know. But yeah, it was a very, and I remember knowing that he was not doing well, that he was in a lot of pain. I knew he had to leave his position at the university where he was. I knew that my mom was scared. Um, my sister was scared. My sister talks more openly about her feelings, so she would be more like pressing them to talk about things, whereas I would just sort of wait for him to say something.
Mhm.
It was a very uneasy time in my family, because nobody knew what was going to happen.
Yeah. Did you participate, like in decision making or anything like that with him?
No,
Yeah. And at
not
the time, oh,
my relationship with him evolved over time, and my relationship to how he deals with his cancer has evolved over time. So he's now had prostate cancer for many, many years. And if you ask him, he'll say it never goes into remission. It just goes into dormancy. So he would say he still has prostate cancer. And so every periodically he'll get an update and maybe his PSA will rise a bit and he'll call me and talk to me about it, or more frequently email me, because now I live on the West Coast, and I have a full-time job. So sometimes it's difficult to like actually have a conversation in the middle of the day on the phone. But he'll tell me about, whatever scan he had and what the results mean or could not mean, or what the PSA, so now I'm more involved in that. But at the time when he was initially diagnosed, no, he told me that he was diagnosed and what treatments he chose and what kinds of side effects he was having and why. Um, but I wasn't a part of any decision making.
yeah. Let's talk a bit about what it feels like around safety. Like, like your dad, was engaged with you and your sister, as a dad, in the sense that he protects, takes care, pays the bills. Maybe his job kept him from being physically around as much as you might have wanted or not. You at that time were physically away from the home. Did safety come into play around that time?
I'm not really sure I know what you mean.
The idea that you're going to be taking care of yourself, whether you like it or not, the possibility of,
Oh,
having,
yes, very much. Yeah.
can you talk
I
about that a
remember
bit?
being, feeling like the world seemed very frightening. Um, he could die, right? The possibility that one of my parents could die sooner than I thought was all of a sudden a possibility. And I think that definitely impacted my like ability to go out into the world at that time. Um, Seeing him weak and in pain from all the side effects was really unsettling.
Yeah. Did you share any of that with him or your mom?
No, because a lot of it was just subconscious, like subconscious kind of thing.
Uh-huh. Did you feel, even now, do you feel comfortable sharing your feelings about your dad's disease and how he handles it?
Yes, now I definitely am, but that evolved over many, many years,
Yeah.
and partially came from as he went on in his cancer journey, he became more comfortable with talking about his feelings. And in particular, he started writing about his feelings, and reading his writings helped me sort of like develop a way to talk to him about it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, some people, some of the kids, so to speak, in our support groups talk about not wanting to burden their parents with their thoughts and feelings about what's going on. Uh, did you have that kind of guarded sense when you were around your mom and dad early on?
Early on, yeah.
Yeah. And now?
Probably didn't really lift until it was clear that he wasn't immediately going to die of prostate cancer. You know,
Uh-huh.
when it
Yeah.
became clear that it was going to be more of like a chronic disease than, you know, the sort of like those early days, especially of the first initial treatments, which were so caustic, you know, when it was like, oh crap, he could actually die, you know.
Yeah.
I definitely was sort of like reticent.
Yeah. So the treatments and the effects on him from those treatments made it more concrete, more real than just talking about it or hearing the words prostate cancer, things like that.
Well, yeah, because he appeared sick
Yeah.
for the first time, whereas before it was like he just looked the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Did your sister have different reactions or feelings than you did? Did you guys talk to each other during
Yeah,
that time about your dad?
she was more open. So he got a radiation treatment at a place down in Florida, and it was given over the course of like, I don't know, 6 to 10 weeks, maybe longer. My parents got a condo down there, and she actually went with them and stayed with them for about a month, and sort of just helped, you know. Um, I think just emotionally, but my sister's always been much more open about her feelings with them. And so I think that she sort of talked to him a lot more openly about the impact on her and about what he was thinking and what he was feeling. You know, she was probably more involved initially than I was.
Yeah.
Maybe also because she was still like, I was living on my own apartment. She was still college age and coming home, and she didn't have a boyfriend. She didn't have a plan for after graduation. So, it was, you know, she's a little bit more still tied to them.
Yeah. So most of the people listen, and it's hard to tell how many people are behind me right now or looking at us. But, figure, somewhere around 1,000 or so. And, figure about 2/3 of them are, men and women whose dad had prostate cancer, perhaps an uncle. We also have a lot of grandkids who come. People who are also like 23, 24, and their granddads have prostate cancer and they seek support from our support groups. The experience that they have and you have, can you identify, do you think like you all, and me too, I keep forgetting I'm a child of prostate cancer. Do we have anything that's common? A common child of prostate cancer experience?
Well, I think generalizations are always kind of hard because each family is unique and each situation is unique, and it will entirely depend on what your relationship was with that parent or grandparent before the prostate cancer diagnosis even happened. But in general, I would say, a lot of children of prostate cancer patients are not necessarily involved in the decision making a lot of times. Maybe they are, I don't know. But maybe the research is like comes into play. And then emotional support, right? Being there for someone without being a direct caregiver.
Yeah.
I mean, again, that's a hard question. I can only really speak to my own.
Yeah. Well, what is your own?
My own situation was uh, it brought us closer together.
Mm-hmm.
It brought us closer together because all of a sudden I understood that he would in fact eventually die, if not of this then something. And two, because of this experience, I ended up working with him closely over many years, and that never would have happened if he hadn't been diagnosed with prostate cancer.
Yeah.
Because he was a cancer researcher and he was involved in, second opinion clinics and was sort of like well known in his realm at that time. But I never would have started working with him if he hadn't been diagnosed with prostate cancer.
Yeah. No,
And instead, over many years, I developed this close relationship with him. And I probably wouldn't have talked to him that much about life and death situations, about, what is it like to be afraid that you're going to die? Like, that probably wouldn't have come up until, I was in my 40s or 50s.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, it's sort of, as much as it's like a kick in the ass that we're all mortal to him, and to your mom, it's also to you and me and to other kids of prostate cancer, in that it's not so much our mortality. I've probably been immortal until last week or whatever, I mean, it's, or until COVID's time. But the idea of they literally won't come home anymore,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a startling, revelation that, intellectually you may know, but I mean, really, until it's real, it's not real. And until the treatments start popping up. And, and by the way, I'm a son, and I don't think I spent even a split second talking about the classic side effects, impotence and incontinence, and we barely talk. What?
I've had those conversations.
Well, not early on, but I mean, I did with my mom though, which is,
well, that's
interesting.
That's kind of like uncomfortable, right? To like all of a sudden have those kinds of conversation with your dad.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about things that, you sort of like comic books and cheesy movies tell us, ooh, don't look in the bedroom when your parents are fornicating, so to speak, But I mean, the conversations are there, the reality is there. And it's, we, as young adults, we are well aware that everything we do for pleasure and for just quality of life is part of living, and they're living too. And now, dad's not going to, may not make it, so to speak, as long as you want him to. The
Right.
idea that there's a, general versus idiosyncratic to individuals is obvious, and it's something to respect, but mortality is a common experience to a large degree, and our understandings of it, outside of the religious aspects of it, whether you're going to heaven or not, and, whether you'll see somebody in the afterlife and all that. But your dad's, construct around, I've got prostate cancer. He shares it with you and your sister apparently, it sounds like pretty close to the time he found out. It's sort of like he's engaging you in his experience of mortality.
Right. And he was actually really young. So mid-50s. It's not like he was in his mid-80s and had already had a heart attack or had bladder cancer or something else, which is the experience of many men with prostate. He was really young, and it was sort of the first time he'd had any kind of like big health problem. And I do actually remember him talking really openly about something that he called the hour of the wolf, that in that interim period between he was first diagnosed and when he decided on the treatment, just being up at night and worried and not knowing what to do. And so we were very involved in that initial, like we knew something, we knew he'd had the diagnosis, and we knew he didn't know what to do. And we knew there was tension and anxiety and worry about that, about not knowing the direction to go in.
Yeah. I mean, my dad called it the witching hour. Like he literally couldn't get to sleep, and I mean, I haven't read any studies or anything, but I'm sure that's a fairly common kind of thing, both concern about either difficulty going to sleep or waking up 2, 3, or 4 in the morning and having difficulty falling back asleep, and anxiety based or whatever, or adjustment disorder based, not urinary based.
And then I remember thinking about it later. So I'm now 47. When I was 40, I had my first mammogram, as you're supposed to. And I remember I went in, and then they called back and said that they needed to redo it, that there was something wrong with the results. And there was a 3-day period. And I remember feeling like, well, this is it. I'm going to die. Like, I knew it was going to happen. This, in my going on in my head, creating all these scenarios, and it turned out to be nothing. It was just, I don't know what it was, but I remember thinking at the time that must've been kind of what he was feeling like, that like, there's that, what's going to happen? Is this going to be it? How will, if this is it, how will it unfold? Like, will I, be painful? Will I say or do things that I would not be proud, like, how will I die? Will I die well? Those kinds of things you go through.
Yeah.
Or great. Will I die with grace?
Yeah.
Will it be messy, embarrassing?
No, I don't think you'd ever have an embarrassing death, but the idea of how to die is like, I used to work in refugee resettlement stuff. I've been shot at and been in conflict zones and things like that. Never really concerned about death, just concerned about like, am I going to know it when I'm dead? Because, you don't hear the bullet that hits you, that kind of thing. You don't hear the mortar that blows up in front of you. I always wondered, like, am I going to be aware of the dying sense and what that will be? I don't want, like, people talk about, like, I want painless, I don't want to know about it. And I'm thinking, I do want to know about it. I want to have that experience of dying, and I know my dad did too. And my dad did die from his prostate cancer, but like, he really hated the narcotics that they gave him. And he wasn't, who knows whether he really was in pain or not, but he kept insisting he wasn't, and he didn't want the morphine stuff. He didn't want the impairment on his respiratory system. And, he wanted a clear head as he was dying. And, it took a lot of, quote unquote advocacy to get that for him. But, and he died with a more or less clear head, and he experienced death. We see that as kids, the idea that, that's also going to be our experience. Just like we saw our parents get married, we saw them raise us. And now, you and I both have kids. I have a son, you have, I forget now, 2 sons? What?
No, I have a son and a daughter.
Son and daughter. We're doing what our parents did. We're also going to, I'm going to die like my parents died, eventually, hopefully not for 100 years, but, that'll happen to you, So, we're now thinking about, because our parents are teaching us by their own experience, even though it's nothing that your dad would have wanted, to put on his lesson plan for you. But, it's another piece of the teaching that our parents gift us with,
right?
Yeah.
I think because my dad didn't die of his prostate cancer, the lesson ended up being about how to persevere through extreme fear and pain and trauma, and still maintain a positive attitude, even when you don't know how things will turn out.
Yeah.
But again, my experience with my dad was that he didn't die. He has been fine. He went through some terrible times. He went through some times where he was frightened and when he was weak. But he persevered through all that with, I would say, a pretty positive attitude overall.
Yeah.
Which is kind of hard to do. I don't,
Yeah. I don't know your dad like buddies, but I think we've had 6 or 7 conversations over the last decade or two. And he actually did almost like a 3-hour talk for our organization 15 years ago, I think, something like that, something extraordinary. Yeah, and it was really quite charming. Scheduled for an hour. The auditorium was packed. We had plenty of time, and he just hung out and talked until people got bored, I guess. But it was really great.
There can be like the public face and then the private face.
Yeah. Let's talk about, you now have an audience of sons and daughters, including me. What do you want to tell us?
Treasure the relationship that you have. Spend the time now. Engage in real dialogue with them about what they're going through, not just as a son or a daughter, but as another person, right? That's my biggest piece of advice. That, like, so many calls, the prostate cancer diagnosis is a wake-up call, not just for them, but for you too. Your time is actually finite with your parent. Your parent may not die in the next year or two. It may be like 20 years, but eventually they will. And so put in the quality time now. Spend time with the relationship. Repair anything that you need to repair. Take the vacations, make the calls, send the letters, foster that relationship.
Very good. Jessie, thank you for sharing some time with us today in the conference, and welcome to the conference.
Thank you.